Chapter 3. It can be accepted that media and commercial art represent the exploitation of images. This chapter proposes that fine art, in the public domain, no longer represents an exploration through image but a negotiation of influence, through signs and postures, sustaining an established structure. Chapter 3. Virtual art. Art today no longer has any influence except in the magic of its disappearance. BAUDRILLARD. There is in all the arts an element that can no longer be regarded or treated as before, that cannot be subtracted from the modern enterprises of knowledge and power. For 20 years, matter, space, and time are no longer what they used to be. We can expect such great transformations in the technique of the arts that even the notion of art itself will be modified. Valery, Pieces sur l'art. 1931. This statement made a lifetime ago has remained somehow very contemporary, perhaps through a kind of perpetual reiteration. It seems that the notion of art is always, in our modern and even postmodern times, awaiting a great transformation through the advent of some kind of technical innovation or other. The latest of these is of course digital and virtual. How in the meantime has this notion changed? Has it perhaps become pasteurized, stereotypical, anestheticizing to the extent that we can no longer feel anything, impersonal, emotionless, anonymous, cynically commercial, absent of all life, without the slightest hint of originality or sensibility, without depth, artificial, superficial, insignificant, mundane, phony? The work of Warhol has been qualified positively in all these terms. H. Obolk, L'argument du paradoxe. What proves that superficial, in art, is a bad thing? Or that signing an urinal isn't art? A new critique in a new environment. An artist is framed in time and place, but the critique of art, and perhaps in this its value, lies in the paradoxical. The notion of what constitutes art is a perpetual debate of the form and the content. A rigorous definition might be proposed, but then there are likely to be antagonists as well as protagonists. The arguments could quite easily find a parallel in the theological, i.e., does God exist? How can you prove that God doesn't exist? How can you prove God does exist? And so on and so forth. How can doing nothing be justified as an art activity? Perhaps the solution is only to be found in the idea of a contradiction that exists for its own sake, as in art for art's sake. A fluid paradox that is presented as the ultimate unsolvable mystery. There is a story that in the early 60s, at the opening of an exhibition in Philadelphia of Warhol's work, there was such a gathering of fans that the gallery owner took down the paintings, for their own protection, so giving rise to the notion of an exhibition without exhibits. A virtual exhibition in a sense, whereby the cult of the personality of the artist is what is virtual, i.e., something that is capable of producing an effect. But more importantly, it points to the fact that art is bound to controlling structures of exhibition, publication, consumption, and economics, where even if nothing is exhibited, it becomes an art something. The form or structure frames and qualifies the content. There can be no laughter at the emperor's new clothes. He has posed and gesticulated in a wild array of costumes, he may as well stand naked if the climate warrants it. We know he has a full wardrobe. The notion of art can appear to be a strange animal. The art of which I am talking is of course modern art. Modern, occidental, imperial and historical. An art that is forever declaring its own demise and resurrection. A veritable phoenix of the fashion season of eternal return. An art that is historicized as it is being created, and that can only exist and derive its potential through this process and the infrastructure of this process. A perpetual dialogue of the visible. To be is to be seen. The image, the material, and the artist are all translated into media icons that in turn become media wallpaper. In media terms, we might say that art and artist have become part of the vocabulary in a language of signs, and that this fetishistic transmutation of signs and images is what separates Warhol from Duchamp and from all his predecessors in the revolution of modern art. Because Duchamp, Dada, the Surrealists, and all those who worked towards deconstructing representation and exploding the work of art, were still part of an avant-garde and represented a kind of critical utopia. BAUDRILLARD, le snobisme machinal. In a mystic vision, the illumination of the smallest detail comes through divine intuition and a notion that it contains something transcendental. In Warhol and the contemporary environment he exemplified it as the contrary. The world is stupefyingly self-evident and devoid of any illuminating essence. According to BAUDRILLARD, this comes from a meticulous perception of the simulacrum, and more precisely of the mediatized and industrial simulacra. Such is Warhol and his serial images, of the pure and empty form of the image and its ecstatic and insignificant iconography. It is at once a new mystical and absolutely anti-mystical in the sense that each detail of the world, each image is an initiation, but an initiation to nothing. BAUDRILLARD le snobisme machinal. But now there will be the new mystical of virtual illumination, and inevitably this will carry with it contradictions. These are exemplified in the work of Latham, a virtual sculptor, and his Conquest of Form, 1988. Questions are raised concerning process and presentation. Latham is not the creator of his images, fractal 3D forms that have an extremely organic aspect. The algorithms that generate them are created by computer programmers, for example the art evolution program called Mutator. He selects from a range of variations. His sensibility works on an editorial basis. The results can then be displayed on the computer or as cibochromes or as video. They are never more than virtually sculpture. There is a minimum of input from the artist, who seems to be a scarecrow on which the work can be hung, and a protagonist of the technology. The works are the photographs of objects which do not exist and which have been produced by a computerized process of evolution. Latham, Art of the Electronic Age, p96. A work that is interesting in the paradox of the notion of a virtual sculpture but otherwise resembles paste jewelry photographed on black velvet or illustrations from science magazines. If the virtual sculpture of Latham presents a paradoxical aspect of digital art with regards physicality and process, then the work of the Butler brothers poses a kind of moral dilemma that has long been familiar to the artist. The Butler brothers' installation, The Dream of Freedom, Vitopia, 1995, satirizes the impersonal consumer culture developing with the growth of interactive home shopping and entertainment systems. This virtual world, inhabited here by computer-modeled bunnies, has the wealthy fleeing from urban violence to safer rabbit hutches in the suburbs. Their migration, together with their adoration of the glittering carrot, takes place within an authoritarian state containing glaring inequalities. The technology that has brought about an abundance of material possessions is also used to punish dissent within the system. We can interact with the work via a touch screen, which requires that we enter information about ourselves, including details of our private lives. In turn, we are given a code number to enter at key points when the safety of the animated rabbits are threatened, and it is at such points that we recognize our lack of power within such a system. The lesson in authority is underscored by unfolding slogans such as "Technology can reward virtue" and "Society's malcontents will learn responsibility." These echo the way corporate, political, and advertising messages can combine to form an ethos of compliance in our own technologically driven, acquisitive culture. Vitopia Exhibition Guide, 1995. Art as satire through simulation. Art no longer with any positive creative force or direction, but as a pseudo-conscience of the establishment. A rearguard of the self-contained, elitist conspiracy that preempts a subversive access to the technology and the infrastructure. Or are they fighting fire with fire? It's hard to tell. It seems like a feudal, yes but that has the gallery as its temple and control as its patron. Dissuasion is a rather particular form of action. It is that which causes something not to happen. It allows for strange events which do not in any way advance history, instead play it backwards by wedding an inverse, unintelligible curvature to our sense of history, i.e. that one cannot have any sense of history unless one falls in line with what is being forwarded as historical sense, one that no longer discloses any negative power, progressive, critical, revolutionary, consequently their only negativity would be the fact that they would not have happened. Disturbing. BAUDRILLARD, rise of the void towards the periphery. It seems that a picture no longer, necessarily, paints 1,000 words in the sense of a story. Rather no words, or 1,000 words of critical, philosophical double takes. Modern art and the modern artwork is conceptual and must be regarded conceptually. A play of distances with regards the fetish and in so much represents an illumination of the unself-conscious culmination of the deconstruction of the image. Even theory is no longer in the state of reflecting on anything anymore. All it can do is to snatch concepts from their critical zone of reference and transpose them to the point of no return, in the process of which theory itself too, passes into the hyperspace of simulation as it loses all objective validity, while it makes significant gains by acquiring real affinity with the current system. BAUDRILLARD, Pataphysics of year 2000. The contemporary environment is composed only of ready-mades, a can of soup, a bottle rack, so that anything made is born a, can you tell the difference between, ready-made, pre-packaged for the super hypermarket of a consumer paradise? The original quest and desire for illumination and thus salvation has been seduced and redirected into endless consumption through the mechanisms of technology and the capitalist economy. The modern cogito is, I consume therefore I am, or for the artist, I create about consuming an art that is to be consumed therefore I am. The digital image is cellophane wrapped at its conception and may even go further and break down the cult of the personality of the artist unless this is artificially produced and marketed as having some kind of commercial value. Seamless, fantastic, science fiction transformations from the cinema and heavily pixelated images of computer electronic games are already part of the ready-made landscape, and the notion of art or the artist are barely discernible in these corporate ventures. It is nevertheless likely that this anonymous landscape shall be recreated traditionally for the gallery by a personality associated with the representation of Sonic, in much the same way as Warhol reiterated the image of Marilyn because it was there. Contemporary art is no longer concerned with the notion of an avant-garde but rather of a rear-guard of a postmodern public domain. A cycling of the fashion show and the strip show where anything goes, but this is what is happening. Everything that is media visible is now a part of an art, is language communication. What you see is what you get, or this is what you want, this is what you get, or this is what you get, this is what you want, and this is the manifestation and the substance. Fine art becomes just one more source in the image bank, but who's got the copyright and the authority when we can recolor it, collage it, and play it right out of context? In the contemporary world, commercial art, visual manipulation, it goes without saying, is infinitely more powerful, resonant, cleverer, and more proficient than fine art, because it is more practiced and competitive, dishing up the surreal every day and giving you all the texts and subtexts you want to work it out for yourself. Up against all that, the role for fine art becomes commentary, interpretation, high-touch refuge, just part of the cocooning process that was supposed to proof you against the modern world. Or, saddest of all, currency. York, P., From Goddess Art to Global Groupie. Modern art has gone a long way in deconstructing the objet d'art, and the significance of Warhol lies perhaps in a deconstruction of the creative act and therefore of the notion of the artist as well as of art. The utopia, no place, of the arts has become a here and now that in turn is becoming no place, and the notion of art is becoming no notion. And so paradoxically a there and then that is everywhere and everything. This utopia, like Warhol, is Euro-American, and it is where the global future is being distilled under the standard of the dollar. The measure of contemporary cults. Copyright law is totally out of date. It is a Gutenberg artifact. Since it is a reactive process, it will probably have to break down completely before it is corrected. Negroponte, being digital, p58. Are the current systems of control out of date? How might they be broken down? What might replace them?